Mr. Ehud Olmert, former Prime Minister of the State of Israel, thank you so much for joining us here at Brookings. We're absolutely delighted to celebrate the publication of your memoir in English with Brookings Institution Press. It's called Searching for Peace, a memoir of Israel. It's also a memoir of you and your political career. And so thank you again very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Mr. Olmert, you were Prime Minister, the 12th Prime Minister of Israel. You were also Mayor of Jerusalem for a decade, a very eventful decade. A minister in many different cabinets, and you've seen Israeli politics and life for a very long time. So I'd like to talk a little bit about retrospective of your thoughts as they come across in the book. You were one of the founders of the Kadima party. You were the first leader to lead it to elections. You founded it together with your predecessor, Ariel Sharon, and you won the election, of course. Has much changed since then? Kadima was formed as a centrist party. You left the right-wing Likud. But there's an argument to be made that today, if you look at the Knesset, at the Israeli parliament, there are many more right-wingers than there are centrist or left-wingers, including some who oppose Netanyahu. And so we see an even balance, but that the right wing is dominant.
The problem is that they, unfortunately, it's somewhat difficult for me to say, but well, I have to say it when I analyze it from a certain perspective, that after me, there was not anyone in the center or the center left that had the presence, the political presence, which could match the political presence of Bibi. Not so much because of the political views. We chose that it's not just a matter of political views. And I was the more explicit center than anyone before me. I ran to the elections in 2006. A week before the elections, I said that when I will be prime minister, which was likely to happen a week later, right, as an elected prime minister, I will pull out from most of the territories and we will forcefully pursue the two-state solution, more or less on the basis of the 67 borders.
So I'd like to push you on this a little bit. One of the things that may have changed is perceptions of the disengagement from Gaza, and you describe now the continuation you wanted to do in the rest of the West Bank.
Absolutely.
Disengagement from Gaza in 2005 and the northern West Bank, I should say, has a very strange thing. And when you talk to people in the West, often if you say Gaza, they take that as a one-word indictment against Israel because of the Israeli-Egyptian blockade. But in Israel, there's a very common perception that the disengagement failed somehow. Could you tell us a little bit about your view in retrospect now?
The perception that people are trying to make, the opponents of the disengagement, is that we are attacked now by rockets and the Hamas is very aggressive and very, very vicious. What was before? We had rockets and we had victims and casualties almost on a daily basis. Had we stayed in Gaza, in order to protect the 10,000 or 12,000 Israelis that lived there, we would have to keep 30,000 Israeli soldiers almost at the entrance to all of the civilian center in Gaza, and that would have created a much worse situation than the one that we have to face now. We have difficulties in Gaza. We have difficulties in the West Bank, where we are occupying a few million Palestinians. We occasionally have some difficulties in the border vis-a-vis the Syrians. But we are enormously powerful. We can crash all of these terrorist organizations, and when necessary, we punish them for what they're trying to do. In the meantime, also, my government decided to build the Iron Dome. Instead of investing all of our resources in building protected houses and shelters all over the place, which in my mind was a waste of money, I said, let's develop some defensive systems that will make a difference. And the Iron Dome is a major difference. So from every point of view, I think that this was a success, and this should have been a precedent. How shall we move forward now? The Palestinians are very weak. They don't have a leadership that is courageous, that has the guts and the determination to move forward and do what I expected Abu Mazen to do in 2008 when I presented him with a comprehensive peace plan which could have solved everything. And also, to be honest, we still don't see anyone in Israel which has the guts and the determination to move forward along the lines that I've presented in 2008. I'll tell you what. The day will come sooner or later that there will be a leader in Israel out of necessity, out of the inevitable constraints. They will adopt the basic principles that I have presented. The basic principles, by the way, that both President Bush, who was a great friend of Israel, even though he was a Republican, sometimes they can be very good, and he was absolutely good. And then President Obama. They both adopted the basic framework that I have proposed, that the solution will be two states, more or less on the border of 67, with some changes and swaps of territories. Palestinians do not interest the international community. Regrettably, maybe, but they don't. What is interesting for the international community, which creates a certain leverage, is the Israeli occupation. On the day that we will pull out from the territories to the lines that we think are the security borders of the State of Israel, which means more or less 67, we will cease to be occupiers of the Palestinians. They will continue to hate us, but they understand that as the time passes, they become weaker and we become stronger. They are less able to create discomfort to us, and we are more able and better equipped and more sophisticated in the way that we can destroy them and also get rid of most of the leadership. So there is a likelihood that they will agree to do what is known to them as a long-range hudna, which is a truce between us and them, which will change entirely the perception of what the relations between us and Gaza.
There's a tension here, though. You're speaking about a long-term hudna with Hamas, but also about the potential for a two-state solution or a deal with the PLO. And you've warned publicly, actually, that Israel could find itself in a day when the Palestinians stop asking for an independent state and rather ask for citizenship in a one-state.
That's right.
And that day would be a very troubling day from your perspective for Israel. Is it possible we're already there? Isn't the two-state solution, as many people feel, an anachronism, a thing of the past? And really with settlement construction, but also with changes in the Palestinian society and their division, perhaps we're already at that day.
There is a danger. So it's a matter of time. Of course, if we will wait another 5-10 years, maybe it will be irreversible. I believe, truly, that it's a matter of leadership, of ours and of theirs. If there will be a leadership that, as I said, on certain political circumstances in Israel, if the leaders in Israel will have a fire burning in their chest that is threatening to erupt and to burn everything around, and this leadership will bang on the table and say, this is what we are going to do.
So I'd like to turn north, if I may. Lebanon and Israeli-Lebanese relations are again in the news. The countries are negotiating with American mediation over the exclusive economic zone and the rights to extract oil. You, of course, led Israel in the Second Lebanon War, and you write extensively about it in the book, including the decision to go into it. Could you tell us a little bit about the process, and in particular, two main questions? One is the aims of the war. You write in the book that you had to make large aims, in particular declare that the return of the abducted soldiers, the issue that started the war, was part of it, and yet declaring big goals for the war also created a sense, certainly in Israel, that the goals were not achieved. Would you have done it differently in any way in retrospect?
I'm not certain. Look, this is a conflicting attitude. On the one hand, you want to say, was I not smart then? that I should have changed now all my perspectives about how we started the war, or, it's very easy to say after 15 years, I would have done it maybe somewhat different. Fact is, number one, and this is most important, there was not any military confrontation that Israel went through in its entire history from 1948 that was as successful, measured by the time that have passed since the confrontation and the outcome on ground. There wasn't a one bullet shot from Lebanon to Israel from August of 2006. There could be no greater success and no greater accomplishment and achievement of the original goals of this confrontation. Until then, we didn't have any deterrence. They were doing whatever they wanted. Every day they were provoking, they were challenging us with military actions along the border. Since then, they did nothing. Why? Because we have created a deterrence that we never had before. The main purpose of this operation was to try and stop for good the daily provocations of the Hezbollah along the borders where hundreds of thousands of Israelis live. That was done. It was not evident a day after the ceasefire because it needed the kind of time in order to be proved. But it was proved. And so I think that many Israelis, by the way, the strategic branches of the intelligence in the army and in the Mossad, they consider the second war in Lebanon, as a great strategic achievement for the state of Israel. This is the working base of the Israeli authorities.
There's something in common to the Second Lebanon War and the conflicts in Gaza, and in particular Operation Cast Lead, that you led, which is they followed Israeli unilateral disengagements from Lebanon and from the Gaza Strip, and then Israel was trying to establish deterrence across these borders. As you know, internationally there was a lot of criticism, both about the Second Lebanon War and about Cast Lead and many of the operations in Gaza since. In particular, in how long they took and the immense damage in Lebanon and in the Gaza Strip. Do you have any thoughts on that? You write in the book extensively about the question of whether to attack civilian infrastructure in Lebanon. And yet the damage was very severe, both in Lebanon and in Gaza and Cast Lead. In retrospect, do you have any thoughts on the length? Could it have been different? Would you have done it differently?
Will you allow me to draw a distinction between Lebanon and Gaza?
Please do.
I think that the Lebanese war, surprisingly, there was no criticism while it took place by anyone, including Arab countries. In fact, if you will recall, most of the criticism was against Hezbollah starting it in the first place, by Arab countries. I'm talking about Arab countries. I'm not talking about the other part of the international community. At some point, it has tilted and somewhat changed. Why? Because there was an attack, a bombing of a high-rise in Kafr Kana in the south of Lebanon, and the Lebanese claimed that there were 100 civilians, including children, that were killed. And that has created, of course, the almost automatic reaction by the international community condemning the state of Israel and so on and so forth. Later it was found that, number one, the number of actual victims was much smaller. The other thing was, and I remember the only time I had a tough discussion with Condoleezza Rice, the Secretary of State at that time. She was very pissed off, obviously, because at that day that it happened, she was about to fly to Lebanon to conclude what has been already agreed between me and her about the ceasefire agreement, and the Prime Minister of Lebanon was scheduled to agree, and then she had to go to the UN, and in a day or two to pass the resolution and end the war. And that has changed everything. And she was very, very upset, and she didn't hide her attitude from me. And I said to her, look, there was a launcher of rockets at the ground, at the entrance to to this high-rise. Now, what do I have to do? What is the ultimate responsibility of the Prime Minister of any country, if not to protect the lives of his citizens from vicious attacks of this nature? Did I have to allow the launcher shot the rockets that will kill Israelis, or did I have to destroy this launcher at a possible risk of maybe affecting people on the other side?
But was there not a Dahya doctrine, as it was called, to inflict massive damage and try to create a different dynamic?
Not in the residential areas. In the Dahya, in the center of Beirut, there was a compound, a very huge compound, with high rises of 30 floors, where the headquarters and the population that was part of the Hezbollah lived. We decided to destroy, to level it completely, and we did. But it was empty. There were no people living there.
Two last questions. The first, also in the news, and a major issue that you dealt with enormously, although less in the news, of course, then, is Iran and the negotiations between the United States and Iran right now, indirectly to return to the JCPOA. You've voiced publicly a very different position to the Israeli government. Could you explain why? Why are you supportive of the United States returning to the JCPOA while the Israeli government is not?
I don't need to have any populistic achievements presently in the context of Israeli politics, so I can say what I really think is the situation and be more balanced about it. I don't like Iran, and I think we need to take every possible measure in order to try and force them out of the nuclear plan. And without going into details, which you would love to hear, but I'm not going to share it with you, I can tell you that in the time that I was Prime Minister, we did many things which were exceptionally painful and damaging to the Iranian nuclear plan. They know it. They know it very well, believe me. I mean, those of the scientists that were on their feet know it very well, and the leaders, okay? But it was obvious then, and it hasn't changed until now, that one thing is to make quiet, secret, undercover, clandestine or covert operations that are extremely damaging and difficult and useful. And another thing is to have a comprehensive direct military attack on Iran. That is not something that we can do. That is not something that we should do. That is not something that can be very useful in terms of trying to stop completely the operations. But it can guarantee one thing. Once we do it, the next morning the Iranians will make a press conference and officially will announce that they are going to build atomic bomb because they were attacked unsolicited by the state of Israel. And it has never been denied that even though the agreement that Barack Obama signed was not an ideal agreement, it has all kinds of flaws and weaknesses, it has improved the dealing with Iran in comparison to what was before it. And the Iranians were committed for 15 years not to enrich uranium beyond 3%. And the inspectors of the International Atomic Agency in Vienna were on ground in Iran checking, and their reports were that they were not violating this agreement. And then when the Israeli Prime Minister decided to unveil the fact that we took the archives, or the atomic archives of Iran in Tehran, There wasn't one single evidence that they were violating the agreement. At the same time, we are free to do what we have been doing for many years, and we will continue to do that which I can't share with you, but which has been very, very effective.
Is something broken in Israeli politics, in your view? How can it be fixed?
I'm not so sure that the source of this is in the malaise of the political system. I think it's deeper. It's something has changed in the Israeli society. The last decade, which is characterized mostly by the rhetoric and the style of the former Prime Minister Netanyahu, was a very bad time for the fundamental values of what Israel was and always wanted to be, which is based on solidarity, on unity, on common causes which kept people together even under the worst possible circumstances. This has changed. Netanyahu divided the country. There is a new book published in Washington just this week, which is called The Divider. This is about another person. I don't want to talk about him. But it can equally be said about Netanyahu, the divider. He divided the Israeli society. He was provoking the different sections of the Israeli society against each other in a manner that has created a lot of bitterness and even hatred sometimes. And that has created the divisiveness, which is now the source for the instability in our political system. But the instability of our political system is a reflection of something deeper that needs to be taken care of. And if there is one thing which is, should be said in favor to the credit of the government last year, they didn't have great achievements, but they have restored a certain degree of normalcy into the life of our country. And also, for the first time in the history of the State of Israel, there was an Arab party, and not just an Arab party, an Islamic fundamentalist Arab party of Israel that was part of the coalition.
Last question. This book was written in extraordinary circumstances, and you've had the experience of the biggest highs and lows. Mm-hmm. The book starts with a view from cell block 10.
That's right.
You were convicted of a case involving contribution to campaigns. You must have learned something there, or many things there, in that whole process that many of us will never see. Can you share a bit of that experience?
I'll tell you, number one, what I learned that even when you're a prime minister, you sometimes can be subject to injustice. And when you are subject to it, you have to decide how you handle yourself. I know that I never got any improper or illegal campaign contributions. There was never any evidence that I got. And I said, there is a time which is heartbreaking, which is terribly painful, that you have to lower your head and say, the law is above you, even when you're a prime minister. And if you want to fight for your innocence, you have to fight it outside the prime minister's office, which I did. I resigned a lot before I was indicted, because I didn't want to fight against the agencies that I was in charge of, and I'm prime minister, against people that used to work for me and report to me, in spite of the fact that I was confident then, and I'm absolutely confident now. I was convicted for accepting 60,000 shekels, $15,000 of illegal contribution that was never given even to me, and that was never given, but that's beside the point. The number two is, of course, to accept a certain proportion about yourself and about life. And it's not easy. it is certainly heartbreaking to your family, to yourself, to my wife, to my children, to my grandchildren. But, that I have to say. But the bottom line is this. At the end of the day, we are in our political positions to be in the best possible way serving the interest of our people. When you feel that due to circumstances as unjust and unfair as they may be, where you can't give the best of you to service your people, you have to lower your head and step down and let others do it. I wish that the others would have done what I was trying to do, but this is a different story.
Mr. Olmert, thank you very much, first for writing this excellent and fascinating book, and thank you very much for coming to discuss it with us here at Brookings.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.